I saw the banker today, and all I got was reasons why banks can't make small loans.
Then what are we going to do, John? We must have money to meet those overdue grocery and doctor bills.
I don't know, dear, but we'll find some way.
You can roughly locate any community in the world, somewhere along a scale running all the way from democracy to despotism.
One of the many, many criticisms of Donald Trump centers on his pledge to deport, to forcibly relocate all 11 million undocumented immigrants in the US in his first 2 years in office. But remember, this is how he defended that odious policy in the second presidential debate.
Nobody knows about it, nobody talks about it, but under Obama, millions of people have been moved out of this country. They've been deported.
Now, annoyingly, he's got a point, kind of. The truth is that the Obama administration has deported 2.5 million undocumented immigrants from the United States over 2 terms. 2.5 million. That's the highest number for any president ever. In fact, Obama is on course to have deported more people in his 8 years in office than all of the presidents of the 20th century combined. I guess that explains why his immigration enforcement budget in 2015 was a whopping $18 billion. That's $3 billion more than the budgets of all the other major domestic law enforcement agencies combined. Now, the Obama administration says the vast majority of the people it deports are people with criminal records, felons, threats to national security, which sounds reasonable, except that a study in 2014 found that 2/3 of deportation cases involved people who had committed minor infractions, including traffic violations, or had no criminal record at all. So complain as much as you like about Trump's grotesque deportation plans, but the fact is that he's inheriting the most sophisticated and well-funded human expulsion machine in the history of the country from his Democratic predecessor. And shed as many tears as you like for outgoing President Barack Obama, but never forget that until Donald Trump came along, he was the deporter-in-chief.
We turn now to the Obama administration's secret overseas drone war.
I want to make sure that people understand actually drones have not caused a huge number of civilian casualties. For the most part, they have been very precise, precision strikes against Al-Qaeda and their affiliates. And we are very careful in terms of how it's been applied. So I think that there's this perception somehow that we're just sending in a whole bunch of strikes willy-nilly. This is a targeted, focused effort at people who are on a list of active terrorists who are trying to go in and harm Americans, hit American facilities, American bases, and so on. It is important for everybody to understand that this thing is kept on a very tight leash.
That was President Obama speaking earlier this year, defending his administration's use of drones, which have been used to carry out assassinations in Pakistan, Afghanistan, Yemen, and Somalia. While the administration has repeatedly defended the program, a new joint report by the Stanford and New York University law schools on the use of drones in Pakistan revealed the strikes have killed far more civilians than American officials have previously acknowledged. In addition, the study says the drones have alienated the Pakistani public and undermined international law. The new report is called Living Under Drones: Death, Injury and Trauma to Civilians from U.S. Drone Practices in Pakistan. This is an interview the researchers did with one of the survivors of a drone attack.
It was Ramadan. We were about to break our fast with the children. We took a bite, said our prayers. The children had just started eating when the missile struck. My 2 sons and I were outside, but everyone inside was killed. 3 people were killed: my brother's son, and my brother-in-law.
The report also examined the underreported psychological impact of drone warfare on the local community in the Pakistani area of Waziristan. The report says the drone strikes, quote, terrorize men, women, and children, giving rise to anxiety and psychological trauma among civilian communities. Those living under drones have to face the constant worry that a deadly strike may be fired at any moment and the knowledge that they are powerless to protect themselves. A local from Waziristan explained the psychological terror caused by drones.
The drones are having a really bad effect on this area. Everyone is under so much psychological pressure that many have to go to the city to see a doctor.
The new drone study concludes most of the militants killed in the strikes have been low-level targets whose deaths have failed to make the United States any safer. Just 2% of drone attack victims are said to be top militant leaders.
The terms slave patrol and militia were interchangeable and synonymous, literally the same exact thing.
With this faith, we will be able to transform the jangling discords of our nation into a beautiful symphony of brotherhood.
Currently, what the communists call their Negro Revolutionary Movement, now masquerading behind the humanitarian banners of civil rights, is contributing tremendous momentum to the communist plans to take over the United States.
You tell them white folk in Mississippi that all the scared niggas are dead. We want black power. We want black power.
Equality of rights under the law shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of sex. The amendment would also give the federal government the power to enforce that principle.
I heard about Sacramento. I was like, damn, these brothers are bad. They're here up in Sacramento in the capital, packing.
Tear down this wall.
Okay, look, after 8 years of Bush, literally everyone's fucking fed up. Like, the vast majority of the people in the country didn't buy into the justification for either war that was in response to 9/11. Maybe Afghanistan a little bit, but I mean, let's be real, it was about heroin. But that, and then finally, and then ending in, you know, the tanked economy in 2008. Yeah, I mean, people are just way over it. And another thing they're real tired of is, like, look, he framed himself as the folksy guy. He, you know, he would pronounce nuclear, and, like, he just didn't articulate things in a very complex way. I mean, like, you think about Trump today, and the guy is just like, he's just a fucking cheeseburger of gross racism and, like, mashed together and blah, you know. But, like, W. Bush was sort of perceived that way back then too. I mean, it's so much different, but really that was so scripted. I mean, he understood what it meant to be a president. I think Bush understood the power that he yielded, and especially in foreign policy. I mean, this was a very sort of focused in his deviant evil and destruction and spreading of death and fucking Western imperialism. He wasn't bumbling through it the way he was perceived at the time. In fact, thinking that he was bumbling his way through things was like, oh, his failed Iraq policy or his failed Afghanistan policy. None of those were failures. Those were resounding successes if your goals are those of Western imperialism. If your goals are those of human rights and, like, you know, giving a shit about poor people in America, then yeah, they could seem like a real fucking disastrous thing to do. But that's not their goals. Their goals are to use us to fund their death and destruction abroad. So yeah, people are real fed up with it. And along comes Obama, who is can articulate, like, complex concepts, and he has this sort of he has an air of academia about him, right? It doesn't really come off as bougie, but it's sort of like, I mean, yeah, he was the president of the the Harvard Law Review, but I mean, again, it was just all packaged like he's a Gen X dude, he's real chill and kick back and whatever, and, like, let's take a look at what he really fucking was, though, right? Okay, so yeah, he comes in and the first thing he does is he passes Romney Care. It takes 2 years to fucking do it. Totally wastes whatever fucking, majority of Democrats he had in the House and Senate. Look, like that alone right there should destroy any illusions anyone ever had of the Democratic Party giving a shit about anyone. They had 2 years of majority in the first years of Obama to do whatever they want, and they passed Romney Care. Actually, a watered-down version of Romney Care. And the right just used it to successfully label it as the most oppressive communist policy ever conceived by the ghost of Lenin.
Must crush capitalism.
And again, we're kicking into that anti-politics mode. The right wing that, when they first, right after 9/11, of course, the right wing was totally worshiping W. By the end, they were a little fed up with the wars and the fucking tanked economy and shit. And, but they were all in a new and invigorated way against the leader of the Democratic Party this time around, because there was something a little different about him and the quote-unquote first black president, Clinton, was this man is actually black. And he had a name that didn't sound familiar to a lot of really ignorant as fuck racist white motherfuckers in suburbia, right? His name and his middle name is the same name as a guy that the CIA propped up and we fought 2 wars against. He has Hussein in his middle name, which clearly, to these fucking moron people that now fucking hate Muslims because they 9/11 to the entire world, supposedly, I mean, according to these right-wing fucking lunatics, that because that's his name, he too is the equivalent of Hussein Osama bin Saddam, and is going to bring Muslim dictatorships and Marxism, all 3 of these things at the same time. It's a weird notion of the world, but they are all in for it. Okay, so like I said, let's take a look at who he actually is, though. This hardcore fucking Muslim dictator for Marxism and communism, right? Well, like I said, one of the first things that really does significant that happens under his administration is the Occupy movement. That we covered that in the last section of the series, last video in the series, and. But that's not it. It's not just the Occupy movement that starts to take root and grow all over the country at the time, which it does, let's be clear, in cities all over the country and from coast to coast and sustained for a very long time. And but then also in 2013 is when that fucking piece of shit that likes to fucking sign Skittle bags and fucking Confederate flags now, Zimmerman, murdered fucking Trayvon Martin. And out of the response to that, to the state's total support of that fucking piece of shit, Zimmerman, that racist scumfuck, was a hashtag, BlackLivesMatter.
One considers the relationship between the Black Panther Party and the contemporary Black Lives Matter movement, it feels like the decades and generations that separate one from the other create a certain incommensurability as a consequence of all of the economic and political and cultural and technological changes that make the contemporary moment so different in many important respects from the late 1960s. So I was thinking perhaps we should seek connections between the 2 movements that are revealed not so much in the similarities, but rather through their radical differences. The Black Panther Party emerged as a response to the police occupation of Oakland, California, and many other urban communities across the country. It was an absolutely brilliant move on the part of Huey Newton and Bobby Seale to patrol the neighborhood with guns and law books. The gun representing resistance and the law book representing democratic rights. But in retrospect, it reflected a failure to recognize, as Audre Lorde put it, that the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. Black Lives Matter, which initially emerged in the aftermath of the hashtag emerged in the aftermath of the killing of Trayvon Martin. And then in Ferguson, 2014, the protest in Furgeson spurred the three women, Opal Tometi, Alicia Garza, and Patrisse Cullors, to create a network. And this manifested a collective desire to demand justice for Mike Brown, who was killed in Ferguson, and for all of the Black lives sacrificed on the altar of racist police terror. But they also asked us to radically resist the racist violence at the very heart of policing structures and strategies. Black Lives Matter very early on recognized that we could not simply demand accountability for individual police officers. Rather, we would have to place the demand to demilitarize the police at the very center of our efforts to move toward a more critical and more collective mode of justice. And this was ultimately linked to an approach that calls for abolition of policing as we know and experience it. Demilitarization also contested the ways in which police strategies have been transnationalized within circuits that link very small U.S. police departments, such as the one in Ferguson, Missouri, to Israel, which dominates the arena of militarized policing, associated, of course, with the occupation of Palestine. So you see the movement from policing the police to developing an understanding of the role of militarization within police departments, which allowed us to recognize the extent to which police departments are descended from slave patrols historically, and at the same time, in receiving this so-called counter-terror training, it links our understanding of racism with the emergence of a terrible Islamophobia that is justified by the so-called war on terror. And so it means that our understanding of racism has to become more complicated. If Islamophobia becomes one of the most spectacular and dramatic expressions of racism today. And so this means that Black people who want to challenge racism must necessarily engage in actions of solidarity with Muslims and with people who are mistakenly identified as Muslims.
Okay, so let's be real clear. The person who's going to bring Black Muslim tyranny, President Obama, it was under his watch that Black Lives Matter was sort of forced to come into existence from one too many murders, right? Also, the next year is when the Bundys fucking jump off.
I want to tell you one more thing I know about the Negro.
when I go through Las Vegas, North Las Vegas, and I would see these little government houses, and in front of that government house, the door was usually open, and the older people and the kids, and there's always at least a half a dozen people sitting on the porch. They didn't have nothing to do. They didn't have nothing for their kids to do. They didn't have nothing for their young girls to do. And because they were basically on government subsidy, and so now what do? They abort their young children. They put their young men in jail because they never learned how to pick cotton. And I've often wondered, are they better off as slaves picking cotton, having family life and doing things, or are they better off under government subsidy?
This confrontation, which didn't involve any bullets being fired, certainly involved rifles being pointed at the federal government. One of the wildlife trucks was rammed by an ATV. One of Bundy's sons was tased, and it started to get pretty heated. There were some people on the side of Bundy that were arguing that women and children should be put up front, so if there was some kind of event that it would look like the federal government was shooting women and children. But needless to say, the Bureau of Land Management de-escalated all of this by just kind of walking away from the situation, saying that it was too hot, it was too heavy, something bad was going to happen, and they would get the cattle some other way. After this occurred, Clive Bundy ordered the sheriff to de-arm all federal officials and bureaucrats in Nevada, and of course they didn't do that. That made him very mad. But that's kind of where that situation stands right now. Bundy has never really been punished for his $1 million fine or for refusing, to follow court orders or any of that jazz. But now we're in Oregon, and how did that happen? Well, Dwight and Stephen Hammond. These were two guys that set fire to some of these lands that they claimed they owned, were state lands that the federal government didn't own, and they were convicted. They were convicted of arson, and they were sent to prison where they had to show up the other day. And that's when members of the Bundy family and the Hammond family, along with about 150 armed militiamen, took over this facility in eastern Oregon as a stand, as saying basically that this building isn't owned by the federal government, it's owned by the people, and they're basically showing force to say that we're not going to take it anymore.
President Donald Trump on Tuesday pardoned Oregon cattle ranchers Dwight Hammond and his son Stephen after both were convicted on arson charges in a case that sparked an armed occupation of the Malheur National Wildlife Refuge in 2016. The Hammonds were first convicted of crimes under an anti-terrorism act that required a mandatory minimum jail sentence of 5 years, but a judge gave them much shorter terms. That prompted an appeal from the Obama administration in 2015, and the two men were resentenced to serve out the remaining years of a 5-year term.
Get out of here, you coward!
The decision triggered a 41-day standoff led by Eamon Bundy and dozens of ranchers over federal control of millions of acres of public land in the western U.S.
And it has been left to us to decide whether we allow these things to go on or whether we make a stand.
The occupation turned deadly when an FBI agent allegedly shot rancher Robert Lavoie Finicum when officers arrested leaders of the occupation.
An Oregon militia organizer is very upset that some of his haters are sending him hate mail and hate objects to protest what they're doing. So I'm not going to give too much away. Let's hear from John Ritzheimer about what he's been getting in the mail and how upset he is about it.
What's going on, everybody? So we went and picked up some mail that came in from, a lot of the supporters, but along with that mail, we got an abundance of the hate mail. And it was really mind-blowing to me that people would actually spend their money. This box right here, $17.90. They spend and waste their money on all this hateful stuff to send out here to us and buy this ridiculous stuff. It's really ridiculous. Even this one was really funny, a bag of dicks. So rather than going out and doing good, they just spend all their money on hate and hate and hate and hate. So We're gonna create a table, and we're gonna continue to do work and do good for our country. We're not gonna be deterred. We're not gonna let all your junk and hate mail sidetrack us, and we're gonna continue to do what's right for our country. For the rest of you patriots out there that are still twiddling your thumbs, debating whether or not you should come out, well, now's the time. If you want to be part of history in the making, you need to get out here and you need to show some support. And I'm not talking about coming out here and being an outside perimeter. Come here and be a patriot. Come here and stand up for your country. Do what's right. Enough talk. Now it's time for action. I hope to see you.
I couldn't love that any more than I already do.
Oh, he doesn't like the bag of dicks.
Or does he? When he picked it up, he's like, oh, look, a bag of dicks. So there's so many things to say. Number one, how are these guys getting mail? Who takes over a building with guns, a federal building?
Yep.
And then the government, who they're protesting, delivers them mail anyway.
This is when the right-wing militia that had gone all in for running around in the dirt with, like I said, they're matching what I call backpack clothes. I mean, it's like a it's like an over-the-top fucking it's like, I don't know how to describe it. I guess it's a it's like if a bunch of camouflage fanny packs barfed all over you. That's what these militia fucking idiots look like, right? But they've been running around in the dirt for fucking 8 years under Clinton. And of course they found out that they really liked doing this. So they still continue doing it under Bush. And they've really, really intensified their prepper stuff. And, they're really all in that they're actually, this is when a lot of the right wing really did start. The far right really just started to realize that, hey, even the Republican Party ain't our buddies. Okay? And so it's all just, satanic Marxist overstep and tyranny of their freedoms, right? And this is the soup in which Alex Jones begins to really grow too, because he has this fuck the Democrats and the Republicans rhetoric, right? And he's really embracing the militias and the Oath Keepers and stuff. First movie he puts out in the transition of that has an advertisement, from Bush into Obama, has an advertisement at the end of it for the Oath Keepers. And so they're like, I think really the first really sort of culmination moment or pinnacle moment in the solidification of the right-wing militia death cult movement in America was when the Bundys pulled their bullshit here in Nevada. And it's significant to understand this moment because there's no turning back from this. So much of what we see today with the Boogaloo, really, to me, in my mind, is these fucking idiot LARPers from Gamergate that came out as Proud Boys and whatever else in the beginning. The few amongst them that got serious and really want to fucking shoot shit and have open warfare on the street are being embraced by this militia movement that's been around for a few decades. And that's not to say they're like teaming up with Proud Boys or that kind of thing, because there's actually some real differences between those crowds. They don't always get along very well, let's say. But yeah, the people from that came out of the alt-right movement are finding a very comfy, weaponized home in the militia movement that I think really finds its legs in this moment with the Bundys. Now, the same year as the standoff at Bundy, it's the same year that Michael Brown is shot in Furgeson. And this begins a sustained occupation, much like we're seeing now in the response since George Floyd.
Furgeson, Missouri has responded to the police shooting of Michael Brown, an unarmed black teenager, with outrage. While the Brown shooting was a catalyst for the protest, the roots of the community's outrage run deeper. Ferguson is about 67% black, but that's just not even remotely represented in its local government. The police force is 53 police officers, and only 3 of those are black. Only 1 of the council members is black. The mayor and the police chief are white. At the same time, Ferguson police have had a disproportionate number of run-ins with African Americans. In 2013, police arrested 483 black residents compared to just 36 white residents. So in many ways, what happened to Michael Brown, for a lot of the black community, represents what could be happening to them and their sons.
You took my son away from me. You know how hard it was for me to get him to stay in school and graduate? You know how many black men graduate? Not many. Because you bring them down to this type of level where they feel like I don't got nothing to live for anyway. They're going to try to take me out anyway.
The police reaction to the protests have done nothing to repair that broken trust. Police are using full body armor. They have snipers on armored vehicles, which are basically tanks. They have been using dogs. They have shot tear gas into neighborhoods. They have also used rubber bullets on the protesters, even when it doesn't seem like they're posing an immediate threat. Crowd control is a really normal part of police work, but the goal is to de-escalate the situation. This heavy militaristic response is likely to do the opposite by provoking fear and defensiveness from the crowd. Some of these tactics may be the result of federal programs that provide local police forces with military-grade equipment, but do not provide any training or oversight on its use. The 1033 program, which allows the Pentagon to transfer weapons to police departments, requires that the equipment must be used within 1 year. This might inspire police to use the equipment even when it's completely unnecessary. The result is that the streets of Ferguson are looking more like Iraq than a St. Louis suburb.
This is all under the, the president that's out to destroy white people or whatever. And that president spent 8 years doing anything and everything possible to cater to the white supremacist power structure in America. And what better example of the reality that Amerikkka is a white supremacist state is the slave patrol's response to the Bundys, as opposed to black people in Ferguson saying, hey, why did you murder Michael Brown? In the Bundys, they come out in 2 different states and point a bunch of weapons at representatives of the slave patrols, at ATF and FBI and cops and local cops and shit, and make a bunch of fucking threats and demands of local police. And then go to Oregon and overtake a federal bird sanctuary and point a bunch of weapons at federal law enforcement in that state. So they cross state lines to point weapons at and threaten the mechanisms of the slave patrols. And what do the slave patrols do? Go, here's your mail. Here's your boxes of dildos, mail. And then what do they do when a mother and a community stand up and go, hey man, hey, slave patrols, you keep murdering our sons and daughters and our loved ones. What's the slave patrol response to that? A full-on fucking, militarized tanks and fucking pointing weapons at them and just unleash carnage and fucking chaos onto the streets, and then declare it a riot and blame all the carnage they wrought on the community they wrought all the carnage onto. I mean, come on, man. Amerikkka is a racist, white supremacist, capitalist, imperialist state of death and tyranny, and it always has been. Okay? Same as it ever was. Same as it ever was. Same as it ever was. All right. Check out this video, and then we'll be right back.
The Bugaboos?
You are now listening to Guillotine Truck.
Well, I just seen on Fox News that NASCAR's not going to let their fans fly the Confederate flag at their races no more, and that pisses me off. That flag is history. You need to leave it alone. It's heritage, not hate. It just so happens that my heritage is hate. And I'm like Linus from Charlie Brown, and that treason rag is my security blanket. And I don't feel safe if I can't have it.
You blockhead!
Since the violence began more than a week ago, the Justice Department has been tracking and arresting extremists the DOJ accuses of stoking violence at otherwise peaceful protests. And it's not just the far-left Antifa. Correspondent Leland Vittert is digging deeper into that story tonight, what we're finding out. Good evening, Leland.
Oh, good evening to you, Shannon. How about that group called the Boogaloo? Well, Boogaloo can mean a lot of things. It can be used as a noun, an adjective, maybe even a verb to describe, among other things, people or events. And if there's a common thread among those who ascribe to this ideology, it's a belief that a second civil war is coming. Ryan Teeter says he's a member.
We're just a group that believes in ultimate personal freedom, as long as you're not hurting anybody else. There is no version of this where the police are not the ones at fault. The protesters have done nothing wrong. They've been attacked and they are responding with violence to violence, which is completely reasonable.
The term Boogaloo comes from a 1984 breakdancing movie, Breakin' 2 Electric Boogaloo. Considered all but indistinguishable from the original, much as ardents claim a coming civil war will serve as a repeat of the one that occurred in the 1860s. Often the Boogaloos sport bright colors or Hawaiian shirts. Experts say that goes back to a reference made online to the Big Luau, which in turn can be code for a civil war. The Washington Post says those with an association with the movement have shown up at 40 George Floyd-related events or protests. Las Vegas police arrested 3 Boogaloos for making Molotov cocktails to allegedly use during protests. But it's important to remember, there is no recognized command and control of the Boogaloos, nor is there an agreed-on manifesto. And the lack of organization among them and other groups makes it harder on law enforcement.
There are some groups that don't have a particular ideology other than anarchy. So we are dealing with, as I say, a witch's brew of a lot of different extremist organizations.
You might remember our reporting last night about the Justice Department trying to find a possible command and control structure to who is pre-staging bricks and other weapons. What's missing is the link between any one of those groups and the acts. Shannon, obviously the lack of organization to any of these groups, the Boogaloos in particular, make it all the more difficult.
Yeah, and often part of the strategy. All right, Leland, thank you so much. So, law enforcement under the microscope tonight. Dallas removing a Texas Rangers statue at Love Field over what critics are calling the Rangers' checkered and sometimes tragic history on race. Minneapolis City Council members are looking to disband the police department, calling it irredeemable.